So you are now tasked, and I know this isn't a hypothetical exactly, but you are tasked with teaching an introduction to economics class to 18-year-olds. And they come into this class with a lot of ideas about becoming rich and famous. So it's not a blank slate. It's not a blank slate. What is the one principle from your faith tradition that you believe is absolutely essential to help them understand economics? And if you could, just kind of a brief answer there, but the one thing you'd want to get across.
I'll begin, and I would say it is that piety is not a substitute for technique, because without technique, piety is helpless to make use of nature for the glory of God. I wish I had written that line. In point of fact, it's from Étienne Gilson, a great philosopher. And that involves the whole of the thing. That, in other words, it's not so much that we are fighting against gravity, to use the metaphor of the previous discussion. It's saying that we are working with gravity. And you don't have liftoff by ignoring gravity. You have liftoff by understanding what gravity does and being able to work with it in order to launch. Piety is not a substitute for technique because it recognizes the incarnational nature. And the fight against the market that we hear about so often is a fight that primarily goes on within the market. We call it competition. So I think those are the kind of core moral principles, recognizing the incarnation and the goodness of the material world.
I would agree with those, and then emphasize the fallenness and the brokenness of the human heart. Again, I can't really stress this enough. Fortunately, I teach 19-year-olds, so they come in and they're past 18 and they've got everything figured out. So completely easy. But helping them understand that they're not the moral, intellectual, cultural, etc. superiors of the world. They do not have the prerogative to choose for others how to live.
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer for that other than to say that the deepest thing I think economics understands, which comes out of Adam Smith and comes out of Hayek, is that there are things in the world that are not designed by any individual, that emerge from the choices we make together. The only part of that that's Jewish is that in the Talmud, in the section called Brachot, I think it's page 58a, Ben Zoma, who is living about 2,000 years ago, marvels that unlike Adam, who had to do everything for himself, and Eve, who had to do everything for herself, he has people who appear at his door with food and clothing and wonderful things, and it's the division of labor that allows that to happen. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs called that the dignity of difference. The fact that that we're different is a beautiful thing, partially because it allows us to cooperate in the ways that we've been talking about in this entire panel, through the fact that we don't have to do everything for ourselves. We don't have to be self-sufficient. We cooperate with others both intentionally in the organizations that I talked about earlier, such as charities. We cooperate intentionally in businesses as we work together to create a product that we hope will be successful. But we also cooperate unintentionally when we take a job that links us to thousands and thousands of people in this great chain of network of cooperation that's called a market. And there's something a little bit mystical and magical about that. Hayek called it a marvel. He was not a religious man, but he did call it a marvel. It's the closest I'd say he came to making a religious statement.
I think the one thing maybe, and this is off the top of my head, that question taken me by surprise, but I think the one thing would be that it's very important in Islam to avoid arrogance. And that's one of the things that I think Hayek shows us is not to be so arrogant as to think that we know everything, we can fix everything, but to avoid that fatal conceit, to be able to recognize that things like prices in the market, for example, and one could quote that hadith I quoted before to justify it on a religious basis, that the prices in the market are telling us things that we need to know. And instead of saying, no, we know better than the market, we're going to change the price, to instead say, let's use this information, maybe analogous to the example Father Sirico made about, knowing the laws of gravity is the way that you get to do stuff. It's not a kind of fatalism. It's rather intelligence. And to combine freedom with vision in order to try to make life better for everybody.